actually works on a foundation project, right? One of the open source CloudFoundry projects. Sweet. Yeah. And then who here might work on a Pivotal commercial add-on to it? Good. A bunch of you also working on that. The rest of you, I'm assuming, are labs or labs customers? Cool. All right. This is predominantly for those that are working on building CloudFoundry, but hopefully it'll be useful for those of you that might be using it as a customer of Pivotal to just kind of understand CF in a broader context. So as Ryan said, I work for the foundation itself. We'll get into what that is, but I'm going to get a little meta on you very quickly because oftentimes we kind of go like, well, why this foundation thing? What does this actually mean? And it's a fairly important concept, the notion of foundations for open source software and how we're moving to an era of joint R&D for platforms that are shared across multiple product lines, across multiple service providers that maybe are just consumed directly by enterprises. So if we really, really step back and we look at this concept of working collectively in a way that allows us to exist within a positive sum environment. We actually have seen this through human evolution, through our cultural evolution, as we've gone from small family units working together just for hunting and gathering to then towns and slightly larger communities started working together, and you give up something in order to get more. So you think about a community of humans. If you have several families working together, you might have to then follow rules within that little community. And having to follow rules means you're giving up a little bit of your freedom. But out of that, you have a large amount of value that exists because of the collective. So that's actually really what open source is all about. So you could take software, you can throw it out on GitHub, and yeah, technically it's open source. And that's valuable in some way because somebody might consume it. But it's much more interesting when you get people to start collaborating with you because then the software evolves and it's the collective input that makes it something more valuable. And of course, corporations are catching on. We're seeing a lot of companies today that are starting an open source project, then creating these industry associations around it. The CFF is one of those. So why did they do this? And specifically, why did Pivotal think about doing this? One, there's a benefit of technical collaboration. So I'm not sure if there are other non-Pivotal employees here working on the foundation projects, but if you go to San Francisco, you see people from General Electric, IBM, SAP, VMware, EMC. A lot of different companies are collaborating together, which is really good. But just as importantly, complex software needs to have a market. It doesn't necessarily have to be just a purely commercial market, but you need a market of users. And so this collaboration is a lot more than just coders doing their thing and building a platform. It's about economic collaboration. But sharing is actually really, really hard. You get issues with that when someone says, look, I'm going to offer the software to the commons. We're now going to make it open source, or I'm going to accept inputs from other competitors. How do I avoid actually losing in the market because I've offered maybe my competitive advantage? That's certainly a risk. I just dumped a lot of time and capital and people capital and thought into this software. What happens if I open it up? I still need to see a return on the investment that I made initially. And the only way that that actually works is trust. Trust is how we go from zero-sum games to non-zero-sum games, positive collaboration. And Pivotal did a great job. They took a very big leap. They went and said, we're going to actually take the software that we own and we're going to give it away. It's not just about open sourcing it. It's actually transferring the copyright to an independent entity. And that actually happened in a bit of an evolutionary fashion. So CloudFoundry, initially written first generation was at VMware, and then Pivotal took it over, productized it. It was open source then, but then it moved into a world where you started to get collaboration from other companies that actually were creating products or services based on it. It started to open up a little bit, but the biggest leap was creating this foundation. It was saying that as a company, Pivotal is going to trust that there are other companies that they will compete with in the market, but at the same time, everyone can benefit from working together. And they started with about 30 members when I was hired early 2015. There were about 30 members. Now we're at over 60. And the key thing here is it's not just a bunch of tech vendors. Companies, enterprises, are actually tying their business transformation on the, to the platform, and they want to ensure that there's a diversity of options for how they're going to consume it, whether it is from Pivotal or whether it's from someone like IBM or Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And frankly, some of the big ones, they're buying from multiple technology vendors. So you see companies like Bloomberg or Citi, we've got Honeywell, JP Morgan Chase. These are user organizations that are kind of betting on this technology, and so they want to be involved in making sure that it's promoted as well. And so we're growing pretty rapidly, and it's because of trust, because we're building up a web of trust across these companies. But trust and its absence and the whole process of actually establishing it is really the hardest part about collaborative R&D. It is fundamentally hard to do because you're going to compete with Hewlett-Packard in the market. You're going to compete with IBM in the market. Yet you need to actually trust each other enough to share R&D efforts. So that's why these nonprofit foundations exist. And in order to work correctly, they have to have a structure that's at least the equal of the for-profits. So 7 points, I'm not going to hit them all, but the basic idea here is that they have to be legal entities. They need to be able to own assets just like a corporation can. They have to be defensible against acquisition by for-profit entities. Now that was particularly important for software, open source software. Have a clear mission and actually have a model that's going to sustain the software long term. That's why the users are actually joining. It's not because they're interested in making sure that Pivotal is doing amazing in the market. It's because they actually want to have the software have a long-term trajectory, regardless of one single vendor's success or failure. So now, here's something that's really important to understand. The CloudFoundry Foundation, legally, it's a 501c6. Did you all know you were coming to talk about IRS code stuff? Yeah. So it's a 501c6 foundation. Technically, it's called a business league. It's designed specifically for industry associations to come together. But because of its structure, because of its tax status, no asset can ever be transferred out of one of these foundations into a for-profit entity. That's kind of important. It's important because as the custodians of all the copyright on the CloudFoundry platform itself, as well as the trademark CloudFoundry, that can't actually go out to a for-profit company at this point. We can't be acquired, and we actually can't dissolve in a way that transfers that asset to a for-profit company. So there's a desire for sustainability just built into the system. So you've got all these multiple entities. They've got very different motivations, and they have to actually figure out how they're going to work together. And you can start to think of it as a bit of a government. You need to be able to make decisions and actually resolve conflicts, because actually that conflict is both good and bad, right? Creative tension is what you get when you have healthy conflict. But on the flip side, conflict can tear things apart. You can see software get forked. You have to have standards for behavior. I mean, we've got a community code of conduct that I would call kind of the lowest barrier to entry for standards of behavior, because there's much more to it. It's not just actually being open and diverse and friendly to people, but it's understanding what it means to behave in a transparent way. And then there are consequences for failing to cooperate. So that's kind of what governments are. So here we are, the CloudFoundry Foundation. When it was founded, there were 4 major principles that were applied. So the first is governance by contribution. And what that basically means is on the technical side of the project, decisions are made based on how much effort and R&D is being put in by a particular organization. This is kind of important, right? The more pivots that are involved in a particular project, the more you get to drive the roadmap based on your product strategy. The more IBMers that are involved, the more of a voice they get to have. It's a very clear design. Second, IP hygiene, right? We're actually fundamentally about holding intellectual property on your behalf, equal opportunity to participate, and no surprises, transparency. Now, I think that these are great guiding principles, but we as a community, within the CF community, we have some work to do in some of these areas. We need to continue to expand the transparency to make it more consumable. So as a team is working, is it just Pivotal Tracker that's visible, or are we doing a better job of actually embracing communication about proposals, making sure that you're getting input from a broader group of individuals? It's not the same as deciding, which is where governance by contribution comes in, but it's a key to making this successful. So we hold the assets, specifically trademarks and copyrights. We could basically do nothing else, and we'd sort of fulfill a bit of an obligation. But the system breaks down. So I like pie. Anybody here like pie? Yeah? Anybody here like pumpkin pie? I mean, that's my favorite, but you could like apple or blueberry or whatever. So you probably like pie too. And if you like pie, this looks really delicious, right? This is the world's largest pumpkin pie. It looks really delicious. So that wasn't actually a that wasn't actually to talk about pies. So think about the pie as a metaphor for a market, and this is specifically for the pivots in the room. You have a percentage of market share right now with the Pivotal CloudFoundry product, but that market's a certain size. Collectively, IBM and Pivotal and HPE and EMC and VMware and all the others actually want to see that market share grow. In fact, the user community wants to see that market share grow because that means the technology they're betting on is going to be around for a long time. So the bigger that market is, even if you don't change your percentage, the more revenue you're getting. I know this isn't a bit of a tech talk, right? This is a little bit more about business and markets. But we are going to keep going down that route. So our collective strategy as a foundation is actually 4 major points. Number 1, evolving the project from single interest to a multi-interest project. I'm going to dig into that in a minute. Second, we are very focused on territorial expansion. So we think about this, 1, in terms of how each individual company is going out bringing the software to market, but 2, how are we collectively covering the globe? There's a lot of markets that are out there. 3, because our users want to see it adopted, how can the lighthouse users within a particular industry help us execute what's called the bowling alley strategy? Anybody that does any type of technical marketing is probably familiar with that strategy. It's a very specific way that you get large organizations in an industry vertical to adopt based on the leading companies doing it first. And last, shift to a federated mindset, which is actually the hardest thing to do. So taking these companies that are fighting it out in the market every day over deals and saying, act together, have the same message, it's pretty hard to accomplish. So the paradox is, how do we enable differentiation so that Pivotal CloudFoundry has clear go-to-market statement? You know what's really good about it. You know what it fits into in the broader market landscape. At the same time, how do we also have some standardization so that there's a base level of CloudFoundry that works across the different distributions and services? How many of you have seen the technology adoption curve, pre and post chasm? A couple of you have seen this before. So I won't rehash it, but I'll give you a very basic idea. It's a model for thinking about how high tech goes from very early adoption, if it's successful, and kind of makes its way into the majority. It applies not just to software, but it applies to all kinds of high-tech devices. So you think about smartphones. They went through this curve as well. I remember myself having a smartphone. I wouldn't call myself a visionary, but I was an early adopter back when it was Windows CE. Didn't work very well, but it was worth trying, right? The real shift was when we got into this early and late majority. That's now everybody has a smartphone. So our job as a collective is to figure out how we help CloudFoundry across that chasm, which is a fairly hard leap to make. Now we could tell you quantitatively that we are in fact not only crossing but into the early majority right now. So we're doing very well as a collective. But the market's always got a lot of noise. There's a bunch of stuff here in pre-chasm, Docker, Kuber, Mesos. These are great technologies. I have nothing against them. But frequently, if you're reading the press, the tech press, there's a lot of noise based on what's happening in pre-chasm. Not all of these things are going to make it into the true majority for enterprises. And we actually have to approach it very differently. And this applies to both how the technology projects work, as well as how we think about shared collective market efforts. So pre-chasm, we still have to be attractive there. How can we open ourselves up? So the container-to-container networking project, looking at the CNI interface, it's a great example, right? There's a lot of activity in pre-chasm in that area right now, so we can take advantage of it. At the same time, we're solving real business needs. This isn't a science project. We're actually solving problems for large enterprises that are reinventing themselves. So we really need to focus on very clear and continuing to have a very clear story about what CF is there to support. So how does it impact the project? So let's imagine this is Pivotal, and I think it's Pivotal green if you look at it. Try to make this Pivotal green. This is a normal single vendor project. You have some sort of a project strategy, right? What's the roadmap for the open core that you offer? You've wrapped commercial software around it, possibly support services, and you're addressing a particular market, right? So as the project leads or the product managers are making decisions, they're making decisions within one of these contexts addressing a particular part of the market. That diagram makes sense to you? Okay, add IBM in. Starts getting a little bit complicated, right? So they have some stuff they want to do that's maybe not in line exactly with what Pivotal wants to do that would be in the core. That might be okay, right? It gets even more complicated if we add a third. So that's a mess. So our job is to figure out how we take the project strategies and make them all unified. So if you're working in the open source CloudFoundry project, that you understand that you're representing the commercial interests of your company, right, to make sure that your product strategy and your market is being addressed. But on the flip side, respecting the fact that there are other players that have slightly different markets they're going after and have slightly different product strategies, and not to conflate product and project strategy. Does that make sense? All right. So how on earth is that supposed to work? Well, there's that little word again, right? It is actually about building trust. And trust requires transparency. It's fundamental to making this all work. So we're a legal entity. We've got this thing called bylaws that were written up by all the, the big tech companies that got together initially, and they laid out a bunch of important rules of governance. And so there's some fairly important ones embedded in there. So one is a separation of concerns. To join the foundation, you do pay some money, right? Because we have to be funded to go do the work that we do. We can't sell anything, so we need some funding. But you shouldn't be able to pay $500,000 and actually get control of the project. Instead, you need to actually have engineers working on the project to have a say in what direction it's going down. There's, of course, the idea that we've got a clean and simple license available that helps with commercialization, it helps with enterprise adoption, and then there's also a very straightforward path. And I don't know if anybody in LA, I guess we do have some folks in LA coming through, going through the Dojo program here, but it's been really, really active to bring new committers into the project from other organizations beyond Pivotal. So you lay all this out, we kind of have three different things we can think about. One, there's a business governance side. On the other side, you have technical governance. They're not the same. And in the middle, there's kind of this advisory capacity. We like to give people an opportunity to actually share their thoughts, right? Whether they're a user that's in the user advisory board, or they're one of the handful of special interest groups that we've created that let industry verticals collaborate, industrial internet, or service providers, or financial services, across vendors, by the way, right? So within FinServe, we've got customers of IBM and customers of Pivotal. That's all super useful. And there's a technical advisory board. Again, they're just people that have an interest in figuring out what would be a good long-term strategy.
Is that part of contribution, is playing an advisory role?
So it's actually not. It is not part of what's deciding what's actually occurring, but it's an opportunity that's open to non-members and members alike. Okay. So let's talk about hats. If you've done open source work in a project that's well established, frequently there's this concept of wearing a hat. So you come into work every day and you're probably wearing your Pivotal hat, right? But other times you're interfacing with other organizations, or if you're a project lead, I'm going to pick on Amit because I like him. You're a project lead who has to make a decision for the release integration project. And as a project lead, he has to represent his company's interests, but he also has to think about maybe the broader community. So it goes back to the idea of project strategies being a little bit more expansive than just what your discrete company is looking for. The other place this comes in, though, is realizing that when you're dealing with the software, when you're dealing with decisions like, for example, is it legal to do X, Y, and Z, you got to think about what role you're in. So as a Pivotal employee, are you asking the question, is it okay from a Pivotal lawyer, or should you actually go ask the foundation lawyers? And in some cases, you should go ask foundation lawyers. So there are hats, and it's hard to know which hat you're wearing. And in this particular project, it's a little fuzzy, but that's okay. We just need to make sure everyone's aware that at certain points in time, you have to have different hats on. So I'll go relatively quickly through some of these governance slides, just so you get a flavor for what's going on. We do have a board of directors. Again, business governance. It's actually an amazing group of people. It started off with this kind of imbalance. There were a number of individuals that were really smart, but didn't have P&L responsibility, trying to interact as with peers that were actually driving P&L for, I don't know, all of Pivotal, like Rob is. So we've actually managed to get a very, very good group of people that run the governance for the foundation. We've got the senior vice president for all of HPE Helion. We've got the man who runs all of IBM Bluemix and SoftLayer product management. Obviously, Rob Mee, CEO of Pivotal, is on our board, and a number of others. So we've got some really, really stellar executives that work very well together, which is important, right? So think about that trust relationship. If you're coding all day and you're interacting with somebody from another company, believe me, trust at an executive level where there's significant profit and loss concerns happening as these companies are colliding can be established. So it does work when you actually get down to the engineering level. And then on the technical side, we have this thing called the PMC Council, and we'll kind of go trickle our way down to the individual developers. So the PMC Council is Rob Mee, Sam Ramji, who runs the foundation. He's who and Stormy and I work for. And then each project management committee has a lead. That lead's generally one of the product managers from Pivotal today, although we're starting to get some diversity at the project level. And this is all about long-term themes, right? How do we actually think about ourselves in a longer range, and how do we coordinate across the project teams, or across the PMC teams? So a project management committee is made up of a lead, again, and then project leads. So wherever you see project lead, in Pivotal parlance, that would be a product manager, right? So somebody who's actually responsible for managing the backlog. So we've structured development in this multi-vendor environment the same way that Pivotal Labs structured its own development, or the way that it works with clients. Now, these PMCs actually make the decisions. They are the place where the actual roadmap for every project is decided. Now, in practical terms, our project leads are just kind of doing their thing, right? They're managing their backlogs. But if there's ever actually a disagreement, this is the group that's going to make the decision. And that includes reps from all the members that might have a committer on the project. It's not just the project leads and the product managers. Then we have our projects. So normal, right? Normal thing everybody's used to. You've got a bunch of engineers working off a backlog. You've got a product manager acting as the project lead. And that's where the specific backlogs are being tracked. There are actually two models, though, for projects. One of them is the pairing model, which you should all be familiar with. But we do have a model called the distributed committer model. It's closer to standard open source development, where it's not necessarily pairing. It may not be kind of full-time working off a backlog. It might be something that's really, it's a part of the system that isn't touched very frequently. I think the Java client libraries are the example of that. They're not constantly being iterated on. So in general, it kind of sits in this distributed committer model. So it exists. There are some projects from other companies that operate that way. All right, then very quickly through this, so we have this user advisory board and special interest groups. These are actually open to anybody. You don't have to be a member of the foundation. Our head of ecosystem is responsible for helping those along. They're really places for collaboration. And so certainly in some cases we've seen them be useful for getting direct feedback about how CloudFoundry can support a particular industry vertical. But I think more importantly, the best conversation that I've heard come out of one of these bodies is in Berlin. We had a bunch of banks sitting around a table. And they stopped talking about CloudFoundry and they started talking about how they're changing their companies to make use of it. Because that's the hard part, right? How do you reorganize an organization to actually make use of a platform that can accept software delivery, through continuous delivery and agile practices? And these are old organizations, so that was really useful. Then we have this thing called the Technical Advisory Board. It's fairly new. Largely, it's a group of very senior technology executives across right now our golds and platinums. We're going to expand to some people that are super smart that may not be in one of the higher band foundation memberships. They're spending a lot of time thinking about what is kind of the long-term view of, for example, packaging ISV software to run on CloudFoundry. So everybody's familiar with package management within a Linux distribution, right? Pretty easy to do, right? I came from the RHEL world, right? So yum install MySQL. On the flip side, we have a lot of complexity right now in CloudFoundry for taking a fully distributed system, including all of its backend services, and finding a way to package that. So I spent time talking to one of the tab members, is Jeroen van Rotterdam. He leads a lot of the technology architecture for Documentum. Everybody heard about Documentum? Heard of it from EMC? So Documentum's SaaS offering runs entirely on CloudFoundry as its backbone. His problem is that he's got a packaging challenge in getting it on-prem right now. So he's very concerned with how do we take some complex app like Documentum, which has been decomposed into microservices, has some infrastructure needs, package that up and actually ship it to a CF environment that maybe Pivotal CF is deployed in some enterprise to get it on-prem. So that's the type of thing that they're concerned with. Does that make sense? All right. So just so you're aware, the staff, this is kind of who we are. So Sam runs it. We've got Scott, who runs our operations. Devin Davis actually heads marketing, so a lot of marketing communications that we do works for him. I had technology. Stormy, you met, developer relations, and Abby Kearns is our first fellow. So Abby was a outbound PM that worked in Pivotal's San Francisco office. She is still a Pivotal employee, but she's assigned to us for a while in this first fellowship that we're doing. And we're going to actually have a few more of these over the next couple of months that get announced, where we need help from our membership to actually go solve for particular problems. So that's Abby. And our job is basically to help you all unlock value. That seems like a kind of a hand-wavy thing, right? I'm not coding, right? We're not going to do the bulk of the marketing. But what we can do is pay attention to what all of the member organizations are doing and to help you realize when something could be done that's better, to help make connections, right? So we can help the startups that are involved in the ecosystem find good interaction with maybe the bigger players that they could have some commercial relationships with. We definitely don't compete with the member companies, right? So we don't sell anything. We're not trying to compete with any member at all. We're here to actually improve the commercial outcomes for all those members. So just as an example of that, let's use one example and then we'll wrap. So we launched this thing called the CloudFoundry certification. Everybody heard this back in December? Everybody heard of this? Not heard of it? All right, Amit's the only one who's heard of this. So some of you kind of waving your hands. How does it affect me? All right, well, here's how it affects you. So we had a goal. How do we take different distributions and online services of CloudFoundry and guarantee some level of portability for users, right? Both applications and skills. How do we fundamentally say this is the answer? We are now crossing the chasm. People could trust it, right? It's time for the early majorities to start adopting. And how do we also make sure that all these distributions are pushing changes upstream so they're not differentiating by saying we're more secure? Because that right there blows away the whole idea of building collective value. So the other interesting thing, and this is where we can do things that I think, frankly, some of the members can't do. So we work with a company called ClearPath Strategies. ClearPath Strategies is an international political strategy firm. Seems a little strange that we'd work with a political strategy firm, but trust me when I say that individuals who have helped run political campaigns in countries as volatile as Venezuela, Ukraine, Estonia, they know how to actually deal with very complex, highly competitive environments. And so we work with ClearPath Strategies. And so they've been putting out a whole bunch of different polls out there for us. This one's it's a smaller survey that we've done, but it's still a decent number. So about 711 participants. This is phone-based polling, spread out across 7 geographies globally. And what we did was we said, listen, can you find out how much CloudFoundry adoption is out there? And what we realized was people that identified CloudFoundry as total use or evaluating, that's 77% of the 711, was about 2, right? And those that said, yeah, I'm a PaaS user, definitely, there's about 4% of them identified as using CloudFoundry. But if you add up, and you'll notice they're not listed here. You won't find Pivotal CloudFoundry or PDubs or IBM Bluemix. You won't find them here. But if you add them all together, we actually have a major percentage of the market, either using CloudFoundry via some distribution or evaluating it today. I mean, in this case, we're not really sure that we're actually higher than Amazon Web Services for PaaS, but we're definitely up there. So when people are thinking about platform services, CloudFoundry is absolutely a market leader. But the problem is not everybody knew it. So then we rolled this out. We had our first 7 companies certify specific offerings. So there's Pivotal CloudFoundry, HPE Helion CloudFoundry, SAP HANA Cloud Platform, IBM's Bluemix, CenturyLink AppFog, Huawei Fusion Stage, and Swisscom App Cloud. And there's more coming, right? So we can expect to see several other major Fortune 500 companies with distributions that are going to be certified as well. And that was great. All right, so we got a bunch of these companies aligned. And actually, I'll go back to this. We got a bunch of these companies aligned on what is CloudFoundry and actually offering it. I will tell you, just as an anecdote, HPE was off on something I wouldn't even consider to be a fork. It was like 50% CloudFoundry. Because they had evolved, they were OEMing the software Staccato, which was something that they ended up acquiring. But Staccato was a startup. Staccato just had to go get customers. So they were just kind of iterating faster in some areas and accepting what the upstream was doing in other areas. And so it really was not CloudFoundry, although it kind of looked like it, sort of felt like it. And HPE was OEMing and reselling it. And then they acquired Staccato. And then we said, listen, you're not actually using CloudFoundry, so you're going to need to either fix that or stop saying that you are CloudFoundry. And that they kind of took a little while to sink in. And then they said, we got it. OK. We're going to work upstream from now on. Now, they've got a little bit of work to completely unravel, but within about a month, they launched a tech preview that was entirely based off CF release of what they called Helion CloudFoundry. That might not seem like a big deal, especially if you think about them as a competitor, right? But being able to shift them based on them understanding that the market is a bigger collective market if we all work together is very important. So that was a good outcome for everyone involved, including for Pivotal. As they get rid of some of their legacy, they want to help actively. And so you can expect to see some stories come in that are going to start getting tagged with Project Retire Staccato, right? They've got a set of features, and they're trying to figure out how to work properly with the teams. But I think we've solved that. I was just in Seattle last week to help them solve for this. They're going to start showing up in the Pivotal Labs offices to say, look, here's my problem. As soon as we can get over the hurdle of completely deprecating Staccato and moving to Helion CloudFoundry, then we'll be helping with the upstream a lot more actively. So then, of course, our marketing team did an awful lot of work. We had great impression, all that stuff, lots of impressions, lots of press, lots of analyst briefings, et cetera. But I think what's more interesting was when ClearPath took a look at this post-certification, it really did have a material impact. So the question that was asked was a number of these PaaS deployments, and it listed them out, those 7 that I described earlier, are all based on CloudFoundry. Is this new information to you? We asked this before we launched the certification and got everybody sharing messaging together, and afterwards. And so, no, it was not new information. Yes, it's new information. We actually had an 8-point increase in no, it's not new information, which means people now are starting to understand that this is a bigger movement than just one company, whether it's Bluemix or HP or Pivotal. Same thing, roughly 48%, funny enough, both numbers are the same, across a great deal and some people have heard about it, as well as how important is it, critical or very important. So this is what we do. We combine market strategy, research, analytics, understanding the technology itself, helping to direct some of the contributors or direct some of the vendors to participate in a more effective way so that you all benefit. And this is the type of outcomes that we get. All that makes sense? All right. So what's next for us? Just 4 points I'll let you know about over the course of this year. So first, multi-cloud. You're going to hear that term used very frequently. I won't get into why. Let's just say that all of the companies involved have agreed that there's a message that we need to collectively have, that CloudFoundry is the multi-cloud platform. Second, CloudFoundry certified developer. We're very excited about this. I know different companies have different certification programs. I even believe Pivotal might have a certified developer program tied to the Spring platform. But we're going to be launching a developer certification that will work on any certified vendor. And our target is, I think we're targeting, Stormy, keep me honest, what did Sam set? Was it 15K? Yeah. Yeah, there was some really big number. We've got a lot of interest from a lot of the big systems integrators, right? But we're talking in the thousands within 6 months or so. That'll be really useful because what we've seen, both when talking to users and your customers, as well as through some qualitative views, there's a huge demand for developers who actually understand how to work with CloudFoundry. So we're trying to help solve for that. And most of the work, frankly, is being done by Pivotal, by IBM, by Hewlett Packard. We're just helping kind of create the environment where we can launch this. Next, move the ecosystem to Diego. DEAs are going away, right? Y'all know that, but not everybody does. But we'll get them there. So that's where I spend the bulk of my time, or solving for problems like this. And then shift from a hub and spoke model of trust to kind of a full mesh. So here's what that means. In January 2015, when Sam and I started, we said, look, you people don't trust each other. You different companies just don't trust each other yet, right? You managed to get to the point that you formed this foundation, but you haven't actually built the appropriate trust bonds. So we ended up kind of being a hub with spokes out to each one of the big members. It doesn't scale, doesn't work. I'm eventually going to move on. So now our job is to help evolve your relationships so that Pivotal has a better relationship, Pivotal Engineering has a better relationship with Bluemix Engineering. So that the head of IBM Bluemix product has a good relationship with the head of HPE Helion product. They know they're going to compete, but they also have to get along really well where they can share things. So, with that, Stormy sent out a contributor survey, so if you actually contribute to CloudFoundry, if you could go on CFDev and take a look at that, she'd love to see you do it. And I would say that's it. Not a single bit of technical talk in there. How do you like that? But any questions? Don't be shy. Anything. Was it worth the lunch? Yeah. Okay.
How many PMCs are there?
Yeah, 5 PMCs. So there's Runtime, which is the core of, really frankly, the core of the CloudFoundry experience. There's Bosch for the deployment system. There's Utilities, which is a little bit of a catch-all. Things like the CLI used to be in it. In fact, it's got very few projects left in it. There's build packs, and then there's services. So there are a couple of services that exist that are active, like the MySQL service. I think actually that's done out of this office. Is that correct? I'm sorry, that's SF now? It used to be that it was here. How about notifications? Used to be here. Yeah. Moved to Toronto. I don't know, you guys keep moving things around, but those were projects those were projects that were based here. So it's 5 of them today. Make sense?
Cool,
yeah.
How does the steering happen from saying like there's this business?
Sure.
Sorry, I can't remember the exact term.
There's business governance and technical governance.
Right. So how do you bring those two together in terms of like an overall platform direction?
Mm-hmm. So it's specifically designed to be a bit firewall. You can't pay to be able to then say what's going to happen in the projects and define the roadmap. So there's a little bit of a firewall there. But that's why I put that kind of advisory cluster in the middle. The idea of the advisory cluster was that with rational thought applied to any particular problem that's thinking about both the business and the marketing side as well as the technical implications and being very customer driven, in terms of productization and product planning. Rational thought, when presented clearly, presents a very clear picture, right? And so that's the general idea. So we can kind of bridge those two based on those advisory groups. Make sense? All right. Any other questions?
So I'm someone that maybe only very recently decided that the term cloud platform was sort of something that I could start saying.
Yeah. That's a really hard one to swallow because I just, we talk about CF, I just wanted to call it computers.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So what does multi-cloud mean?
Yeah. Isn't marketing awesome? No, in all seriousness, so marketing terms are horrible, right? I hate this. I have to do analyst briefings sometimes, and you have to speak the language of the analyst, and the analysts will tell you. I know they're going to read this or watch this on YouTube. Analysts will tell you that they define the words, right? And actually, it's this weird combination of marketers and analysts that sort of together come up with the jargon that we use to describe things. In a very concrete way, though, right? So let's be real about it. What multi-cloud means is that fundamentally, large enterprises aren't saying really all on Amazon or really all on-prem to their data center, right? They're going to use different platforms. It's going to be some data centers that they run, might be virtualized, might have OpenStack, might not. They're going to use some Amazon. They're going to use some of this. They're going to use some of that. That's the reality of the enterprise market. And so it's us trying to help the market realize the reality of their situation instead of everyone talking about all in. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So I'm just being honest that sometimes marketing words are, marketing words. Yeah. As an ex-developer, I have like a long list of things that really hurt me every time I say them, but I say them anyway. Any other questions?
Can you speak a little bit more about what a dojo is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. You're kind of in one, except do we have anybody here that's not from Pivotal right now? No? Oh, yeah. You two are? All right. So you're sort of doing it, right? So a dojo is effectively coming in to work on a project. So a CloudFoundry dojo specifically is joining a project team that exists within the foundation, right? And it's a period of time that you're learning. So what it really means is it's an onboarding process at a location and with a specific project based on having taken the RPI and based on having a commitment to sticking with CloudFoundry projects in general for a longer period of time. So, does that answer? All right.
Saying all foundation committers go through an RPI?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And in fact, we're training, so I know that it used to just be a Pivotal only thing. IBM's got some people that are being trained currently on how to actually perform RPIs. There's 2, soon to be 3 from EMC as well. So it's something that Pivotal is making a very specific investment in to say, let's take this concrete practice and let's figure out how we train people across the CloudFoundry community to do it, because we all have the same expectations for quality and process and how we're all going to operate. Any other questions?
What's it mean to be a CloudFoundry developer? The new program.
What does it mean to be a CloudFoundry developer? The certification program. You know how to use the CLI and its flags and all that stuff. Manifest files. I mean, it seems like, oh yeah, it's easy, right? Because if you're building it or using it every day, it's kind of a no-brainer. But there's a need to be educated on it. There's the team from Cloud Credo who Pivotal acquired. It's where Colin and others came from. Had written open source training on let's actually spend a whole day talking about what's the developer process to understand how to interact with CloudFoundry. I know that's came in through the Cloud Credo acquisition into Pivotal, and I believe it's about to be open sourced as part of them actually running the training again in Santa Clara. So if you think about a whole day worth of training, I mean, at minimum you can test on that, right? So there's a huge need for basic education. I mean, I'm going to frame it in a bit of perspective here. When we talk about a large enterprise, let's just take BNY Mellon for a second. How many developers, roughly, do you think BNY Mellon has? Anybody care to guess? Give me a number. 5,000? Yeah, so you're like orders of magnitude off. Higher, right? So we don't need to worry about the specific number, but just think about that for a second. What do they do? Actually, BNY Mellon is an amazing example of a large financial company that's old, has been around for a long time. They're actively reinventing themselves. So BNY Mellon's Innovation Center looks like Pivotal Labs, right? It's right across the river from Manhattan. It's in Jersey City. You go up there, it's the whole floor. You've got concourse pipelines up on the wall. I mean, they're actively reinventing themselves. So just think about, startups are going to go disrupt the financial services industry. Well, what if the FinServs actually figured out how to use all of their resources, all of their people, and move it really quickly? Right? What happens then? Right? They start to look maybe a little bit more defensible, start to look like they might be a little bit more customer service oriented. And so that's kind of at the heart of why people are interested in CloudFoundry certification, because it's one of the building blocks necessary to really getting a large percentage of their organization to be much more effective. And employing technology is something that's strategic versus something that's a cost center. Any other questions? Cool. All right, so then before we close, I'm going to ask for feedback. What could I do better? Because this is the first time we've given this talk, and we're going to go to every location where CloudFoundry is going on. Anybody have the courage to tell me something I could do better? Less in the marketing talk, more in the marketing talk?
Yeah, so as not a CF dev, you mentioned at the beginning that this was sort of tailored more towards CF devs. There's a lot of acronyms that you had thrown out there and maybe technologies that perhaps you could have some slides while you're talking about it that just has the acronyms and has the expansion.
I appreciate that. Cool. All right. Well, I'll try to knock something out on the flight up to San Francisco. Good deal. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I know it's your lunch. Hopefully you enjoyed the lunch. So great meeting y'all. And I was on time.